everyone, it's Leela from Miss Kiss Creations. Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to show you how to apply glitter to a tumbler using the epoxy method. So I'm going to go over the materials needed and then we'll go ahead and get started. You're going to obviously need a tumbler. Today I'm working with a 10-ounce Lowe ball Ozark Trail I did purchase from Walmart. You're going to need to prep your tumbler. If you want to know how to prep your tumbler, I do have a video I will be linking in my description below. And you're going to want to spray paint your tumbler. I am using a red glitter, so I went ahead and I spray painted my tumbler red. If you don't have the same color as your glitter, go ahead and spray paint it white. It is okay. The red I'm using today is Satin Apple Red by Oleum. So it's apple red and it is a satin finish. And you're gonna need some epoxy. I am using Amazing Clear Cast. I did go ahead and already mix my epoxy. And you're gonna need some glitter. Today I'm using Recollections and I'm using the color Garnet. So it's a nice red. You're also gonna need a heat gun. I am using my Wagner heat gun that I use in all my videos. I did purchase this from Lowe's. You're gonna need some gloves to protect your hands as well. So what you're going to want to do first is you're going to want to prep your tumbler and then go ahead and spray paint your tumbler. Again, I spray painted mine red. And you're going to put your tumbler on the turner. And then you're going to go ahead and apply your epoxy. Now, I did already mix my epoxy before the video started just to make an easier video for y'all. And the amount that I mixed, I don't know. Only because I am doing multiple tumblers right now. But I will say, the amount that you need is too little enough to even mix it separately for the cup, if that makes sense. So every time whenever I go ahead and I epoxy and glitter a tumbler, I make sure I'm doing at least 4 or 5 other tumblers because the little amount you're not going to be able to mix. So let me explain, or let me show you what I'm talking about. So to apply your epoxy, I have my epoxy in my Dixie cup. I'm just going to take my gloved finger. I'm just going to dab my finger inside of the Dixie cup and then spread the epoxy on the tumbler. You're only needing the epoxy thin enough or thick enough to make it, you only need it thick enough or thin enough to make an adhesive on the tumbler. So you don't want this to be too thick. You want this to be a thin layer of epoxy. That's why I recommend just sticking your finger inside of your Dixie cup and then spreading out the epoxy onto the cup. I know a lot of people I've seen drizzle it on the cup and then take off the excess later. To me, it never works out and I end up having too much epoxy on the tumbler. If you do have too much epoxy on the tumbler, what will happen is the epoxy will soak up and absorb the glitter, and you don't want that to happen, because if that happens, then you're going to use way more glitter than what you really need. So make sure you are spreading out a thin coat, and you want an even amount, obviously, onto the tumbler. And I'm just dipping my finger again, and that much onto my finger, and I'm putting that on the bottom of the tumbler. And you think it's a little amount, but it does spread. It just takes a little bit of patience, and it takes some time for it to spread on the tumbler. And then if you feel like you've spread too much, you just push down onto the tumbler, and you take the excess epoxy off the tumbler. So I recommend starting out with a smaller tumbler, like this 10-ounce. If you are rather new at this, play around with how much epoxy you need, or how much adhesive you're going to need, I should say. And then once you get confident enough, go ahead and work on a bigger tumbler. So I'm just spreading a smooth coat. I'm pushing down on my tumbler with my gloved finger, and I'm just making sure it is an even coat, and I'm making sure that there's every bit of the tumbler covered with my epoxy. Because if there's a section of the tumbler that doesn't have epoxy, that section of the tumbler will not have glitter on there, and it will be noticeable whenever you apply your glitter to your tumbler. All right, so now that I have the coat of epoxy on my tumbler, I'm gonna go ahead and hit it with a heat gun. So I'm going to take my Wagner heat gun and I'm going to go ahead and just hit it with the heat gun for a couple seconds. What this does is this makes all of the streaks of the tumbler that you've created with your gloved finger, it takes them out. If you have streaks on your tumbler, if you see streaks in your epoxy, whenever you go to glitter your tumbler, there's going to be streaks in your glitter. You kind of don't want that because it kind of messes up the design. So let's go ahead and hit it with the heat gun. I'm keeping my heat gun about 10 inches away from my tumbler. Now that I've hit my tumbler with a heat gun, you can see that there's little to no streaks on the tumbler. So that's what you want. You don't want any streaks on the tumbler. You can let your tumbler spin for a couple moments if you like. You'll see the streaks coming out of there. So now you're gonna go ahead and take your glitter. I did put my glitter inside of a Dixie cup. It just gives you more control of the glitter. And then you're just gonna apply your glitter to your tumbler. And since this is one coat or one color, this is going to be very, very easy. And if you've noticed, I did add I call it a catch paper underneath my tumbler, so I can catch all the glitter, so I can just put the glitter right back into my Dixie cup and then my container of glitter. So every time you glitter a tumbler, like I say on all my videos, make sure you're doing a nice even coat onto your tumbler. I dumped my excess glitter back into my Dixie cup, and then I'm just re-pouring the rest of the glitter onto the tumbler. And there's no rhyme or reason on how you do this. How I like to do it is if you see my finger tapping, I tap it like I'm tapping salt. Just like a salt shaker. And once you get closer to the rim, you're gonna wanna get closer with your Dixie cup or your glitter, because you want a full, even coats of glitter on your tumbler, and you don't wanna miss any spots on the edge. Or I should say on the rim of the tumbler. And don't try to chase the tumbler. You could just leave your Dixie cup like I have here. And if you do miss a spot and you notice you've missed a spot on the tumbler, just let the tumbler roll around. Let it go all the way around and just hit that spot when it comes back around. There's no need to rush this or to chase the tumbler all around. Just let it spin and it'll come right back around. And what I'm doing now is I'm just taking my hand and I'm just tapping my arm of my cup turner. And I'm just tapping the excess glitter off of my tumbler. And I'm going to take the rest of my glitter and I'm pouring it back into my Dixie cup. And then I'm just going to take my glitter again and I'm just going to pour it onto my tumbler just to get the spots that I might have missed. Maybe my eye can't touch now or can't see now. And just to get a fuller coverage of the glitter on the tumbler. It looks like it is fully covered, and again I'm going to go ahead and tap off the excess glitter with my hand by tapping on my football arm or my turner arm, and then I'm going to pour the excess glitter into my Dixie cup again. This is all back and forth. Now, like I usually say, don't forget the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my turner. So now you're going to want to hold your tumbler and your football arm with your hand, and then you're going to take your glitter, you're going to hold your tumbler at an angle, and don't worry about the epoxy running down or anything. It's not going to run down. It's locked in with the glitter. You're going to take your glitter and you're just going to angle your tumbler, and you're just going to spin your tumbler. And what I'm doing is that I'm focusing on the edge of my tumbler, and that way focusing on the edge carries the glitter down. So I'm hitting the edge, I'm making sure I'm getting the edge, and it carries the glitter down onto the middle. So it gives me a nice full coverage. And then that, with the tumbler slanted, you can see that the tumbler just falls right down onto the tumbler. And just tap off the excess, just like as I would if it was on the turner. And then I'm going to place it back on the turner, and then I'm going to turn my turner on. So I'm gonna let my tumbler spin on the turner for about 2 hours, and then we'll get started with the next step. All right, y'all, I am back. My tumbler has been spinning for a couple hours, and I have mixed my epoxy off camera. So the next step is for me to apply my epoxy to my glitter tumbler. I mixed about 15 mLs of epoxy, but I'll probably end up using only 10 mLs, maybe 7 mLs. So I always mix a little bit more, and I have more than one project always going on. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pour my epoxy onto my tumbler, and I'm just going to completely cover it with my epoxy. I am using a gloved finger, but I know a lot of people, they do use a makeup brush. So if a makeup brush works better for you, then so be it, and use a makeup brush. I know it's sometimes it's easier for other people. I know I can feel if it's even or not whenever I use my gloved finger. But please do not use an ungloved finger, because epoxy is, whenever it's not cured, it's not good for the skin. So there's no rhyme or reason on how to apply the epoxy to the tumbler. I just drizzle it on, and then I wipe my finger from the bottom to the top of the tumbler. It looks like I used about 7 mLs of epoxy so far. And again, I'm working with a 10-ounce tumbler. I am not that good at measuring out how much epoxy I need. Like I said, I am doing multiple projects at one time. I always have leftover epoxy to do for another project. All right, it looks like the tumbler is fully covered, and I'm going to hit the bottom now. And you can just pour your epoxy on the bottom and then wipe it down with your finger. Like so. Kind of hit the edge like the same way I hit the edge with the glitter. Now that my tumbler is completely covered with the epoxy, I'm going to go ahead and hit it with my heat gun for a couple seconds. This is just to pop any bubbles and even out the epoxy on the tumbler. Now that I've hit my epoxy with my heat gun, what I do is I always take my gloved finger, and this is very, very important. A lot of times when I first started making tumblers, my bottom of my tumblers were very uneven, and the reason was because when I hit it with heat gun, the epoxy becomes thin, and if my tumbler is a little slanted, the epoxy goes towards the bottom. So it makes an uneven finish on the bottom of the tumbler. So I just take my gloved finger and then I just glide it on the bottom of the tumbler. And that just gets off any excess glitter or any excess epoxy onto the tumbler. And that gives you an even finish on the bottom. So if any extra, which you see, any extra epoxy ran down from the heat, it won't be there anymore. So whenever you put your tumbler on right side up, it won't wobble or anything. That step is very simple and it's very important, and I recommend you not to skip it. Once your tumbler is fully coated with the epoxy, you're gonna let it spin on your turner for about 4 to 6 hours. And then once it has spun for 4 to 6 hours, you're gonna let it air dry for another 6 hours. A total drying time of 12 hours. And I am back. I let my tumbler spin and air dry for at least 12 hours, and then I'm going to go ahead and take it off my turner. And here is my tumbler completely dry. If you notice any spots around your tumbler that are a little bumpy or poking up a little bit, what I do is I take a sanding block. I purchased a sanding block from Lowe's. It is a 220 fine sanding block. And all I do is I run this sanding block underwater, and then I go ahead and I just sand my tumbler lightly. So that's it. So I just wet the sanding block and then I sand it. And that should take away any of the bumpiness to your tumbler. Do keep in mind, if you do sand your tumbler, make sure you're sanding your tumbler very, very lightly. Because if you sand your tumbler hard, it's going to sand off the glitter off the tumbler, and you don't want that. So you're going to have spots of white around the tumbler. So I went ahead and I sanded my tumbler very hard just to show y'all what I'm talking about. If you see the whiteness into the glitter, that's where I sanded the glitter. So this is the part without it sanded, and this is the part with it sanded. Personally, whenever I'm using fine glitter, which is what I use today, I rarely sand my tumbler. So I just wanted to add the sanding part on the video just in case your tumbler was a little bumpy. But not all the time do I use my sanding block. Like my example here, this tumbler has been epoxied, glittered, then epoxied again. I have a decal on the other side, and then I epoxied it over again. And you see this tumbler is very, very smooth, and there's no bumpiness on this tumbler. I hope this video helped you. If it did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to watch more crafting videos involving tumblers, go ahead and click the subscribe button and then click the notification bell. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.